Hello, everyone. It is Dr. Linder, and in this lecture, we are going to talk about muscle. So let's just review what the different types of muscle are, right? So this should be a little bit of review for what we covered. If you think back when we covered tissues, we spoke about the four different types of tissues, and we talked about epithelial tissue and connective tissue, nerve, and muscle. When we spoke about muscle, we introduced these three types: skeletal muscle, cardiac muscle, and smooth muscle. Smooth muscle is sometimes referred to as visceral muscle. Why is it referred to as visceral? Because it is found where our viscera is, and viscera refers to organs, just like the GI tract, the gastrointestinal tract. What are some of the functions of smooth muscle? Well, smooth muscle is muscle that we find around the trachea, around the small intestine, large intestine, stomach, arteries. If we are talking about the gastrointestinal tract, the smooth muscle that surrounds the intestines, when those muscles contract, the muscular contractions are referred to as peristalsis. Peristalsis. That is the smooth muscle contraction that moves food in the direction that food should move. When you hear a reverse peristalsis involves vomiting. That's when it goes backwards. Now, smooth muscle or visceral muscle is involuntary, as is cardiac muscle. The only one that is consciously or voluntarily controlled is skeletal muscle, because skeletal muscle is the type of muscle that attaches to your skeleton. And when those muscles contract, which means when they generate tension, they transmit the tension from the muscle to the tendon, and the tendons pull on the bones. And that's what creates the voluntary movement. Cardiac muscle that has those intercalated discs, the heart, when it pumps blood. And it pumps blood to the lungs, or it pumps blood to different parts of the body to bring oxygen. If it's pumping blood to the lungs, it's pumping blood to the lungs for the sole purpose of picking up oxygen. And then after the red blood cells are oxygenated, it'll drive that red blood cell to other parts of the body so that it can get into the mitochondria, because remember, it needs oxygen to produce ATP. So I have a really good video on my YouTube channel that goes over the heart. I think it's got 400, 500,000 hits already. So it's a really, really good, well-drawn picture to help you understand the atrium and the ventral when you get into anatomy and physiology too. Now, what is the primary function of skeletal muscle? Well, it is when it contracts, it provides movement. So what do we mean by contraction? When we use the word contraction, most students assume that we are referring to a shortening of a muscle. When a muscle contracts, students typically think it shortens. And it's true, but not entirely true, because muscles can contract when they're shortening, when they're lengthening, and when they are remaining the same length. So the term contraction really means that there's tension that's being generated within the muscle. And you can have tension that's being generated in a muscle when a muscle is shortening, lengthening, or remaining the same length. But nonetheless, when there's contraction, it can provide bodily movement. When it contracts, it can stabilize the body. Muscles can also store nutrients. Muscles can store sugar, right? Glucose. But when it stores glucose, we don't call it glucose anymore. We call it glycogen. Glycogen. Remember, anything that ends in ogen means it's inactive. So when you're taking glucose and you're making it inactive, that means you're storing it in muscles or you're storing it in the liver. Those are the two places that glucose can be stored safely, in the muscle as glycogen and in the liver as glycogen. And then glycogen, which is inactive, can be converted back into glucose. Muscles also generate heat. Think about that, right? When you have a fever, sometimes your muscles shiver and they shake. And when they shiver and shake, it can raise your body temperature. It can warm you up. Happen to currently live in the Northeast, and it can get cold in the winter. 5 degrees, 10 degrees, and if you're outside a little bit too long, the muscles are going to shiver, and when they shiver, they generate heat. When you're exercising and muscles are contracting, they generate heat, which is why we perspire when we exercise. Now, some of the properties of muscle tissue is muscles are electrically excitable. Okay, we're going to talk about the neuromuscular junction today, the NMJ, neuromuscular junction. Neuro for nerve, muscular for muscle, and junction is where they come together. So the neuromuscular junction is where the nerve and muscle meet. There's going to be a lot of magical things that we're going to talk about today that I will help you understand that take place there. Muscles have the ability to contract, contractility, and what we mean by that, again, is tension, muscle tension. Extensibility, muscles have a degree of extensibility. Muscles can shorten and they can go back to their resting length, and they also have a degree of elasticity. Like a rubber band, it can stretch a little bit. But if it stretches beyond its anatomical limit, if any soft tissue stretches past its anatomical limit, if we're talking about muscles and tendons, then those are what we refer to as a strain. What is a strain? A strain is when a muscle or tendon is stretched beyond their normal anatomical limit, which is different. It's not the same thing as a sprain with a P. So they sound alike, but they're very different. So sprains with a P involve ligaments. Strains with a T, think of tendons and muscles. So whenever you strain something, that means it's a muscle or tendon that's stretched beyond its normal anatomical limit. And when you sprain something, it refers to a ligament that is stretched beyond its normal anatomical limit. Okay, we'll take a break, and when I come back, I will talk about different types of contraction.